Good morning, class. Today, the class covers Chapter 10 of the textbook. The topic is the political economy of trade policy. The models presented up to this point generally suggest that free trade maximizes national welfare, although it clearly is associated with income distributional effects. Most governments, however, maintain some form of restrictive trade practices. This chapter investigates reasons for this. One set of reasons concerns circumstances under which restrictive trade practices increase national welfare. Another set of reasons concerns the manner in which the interests of different groups are weighed by governments. The chapter concludes with a discussion of the motives for international trade negotiations and a brief history of international trade agreements.
As of late, trade has been a hot topic. I'd like to discuss the concept of free trade and its counterpart, protectionism. Protectionism is a policy of discriminating between foreign and domestic goods and services. The method that is often used to implement protectionism is a tariff. A tariff is just a tax on imports. One reason that tariffs are implemented is to protect domestic producers. For example, let's say that you're a businessman in America, and your company is purchasing steel from China at a price of $10 per pound. A tariff is implemented, and now you have to pay a 30% tax. So the price of buying steel from China goes from $10 per pound to $13 per pound. Chinese steel is now $13 per pound. So the businessman may now look for cheaper steel producers within America. Let's say that he finds an American steel producer that sells steel at a price of $12 per pound. As you can see, the domestic steel producer benefits here. But the businessman, in the end, went from paying $10 per pound to $12 per pound. This increase in costs may force the businessman to make layoffs or hike up his prices. Another reason why protectionist policies are implemented is to deal with an imbalance in the balance of payments accounts. Balance of payments is a record of trade and financial transactions between consumers, businesses, and governments from one country to another. An inflow of currency is considered a positive. So for example, if an American soy farmer sells his product to a Chinese business, then Chinese currency flows into the country. In other words, exports are considered a positive. An outflow of foreign currency is considered a negative. So simply put, imports is considered a negative. If a country is experiencing a deficit in the current account of balance of payments, it means that it is experiencing a trade deficit. Trade deficits can be bad for the following reasons. The first is that the currency could depreciate. If people want to buy more and more Chinese products as opposed to American products, then it makes the Chinese currency more valuable relative to the US dollar. One positive to this is that there's an increase in demand for domestic goods. In this example, Chinese consumers will now want to purchase more American goods. On the other hand, since the value of Chinese currency is now relatively higher, so are the costs of Chinese raw materials to Americans. Domestic businesses that rely on raw materials from China will see an increase in costs. The second disadvantage is that interest rates could spike. As I mentioned before, the Chinese would be more willing to purchase domestic goods, which would increase demand, and an increase in demand leads to an increase in prices. I also mentioned that some domestic businesses that rely on raw materials from China would also see a rise in costs, which may force them to increase their prices. All this inflation may compel the Federal Reserve to increase interest rates. A rise in interest rates makes it harder for domestic businesses to take out loans. So the third possible negative is that there could be a massive increase in foreign ownership of assets. For example, if the purchasing power of the Chinese currency increases massively relative to the dollar, then many Chinese people may invest in American lands, factories, and government debt. Now this may seem nice at first, but if all the land, all the factories, and all the government debt is owned by the Chinese, then the economic sovereignty of the US may be in danger. The fourth potential problem, and perhaps the most obvious, is that the country can grow in massive debt to other countries. Another reason why protectionism is pursued is due to the belief that it is not wise to be dependent on other countries with regards to certain industries. For example, some may believe it is unwise for the US to be dependent on Germany for military equipment like tanks and airplanes. What if the US were to get into a war with Germany or a German allied country? If the US is dependent on another country for an essential good, then that country may have a major influence on the US. Another motive behind protectionism is that it prevents large corporations from evading environmental and labor regulations at home. As mentioned before, without protectionism, it is easier for domestic producers to be run out of business by foreign producers. It also allows large corporations to move overseas, leaving many workers out of jobs. Some may argue that these people just need to get a new job, but getting a new job can cost time and money. How do these people put food on the table in the meantime? Protectionism may sound nice at this point, but let's discuss its counterpart, free trade. Free trade is a policy that allows consumers to buy from foreign countries just as freely as they purchase goods and services domestically. The first idea that I want to talk about is something that is most likely taught in every Economics 101 class, comparative advantage. Let's say that the climate in the US is great for growing strawberries. Let's also say that the metals needed to build computers is very rare in the US. Let's also say that it's the opposite in China. The metals needed to build computers are abundant in China, but the climate is not great for strawberries. Let's say that for every one computer built in America, it could instead use those resources to harvest 100 strawberries. For every one strawberry harvested in China, it could instead use those same resources to build 100 computers. So let's imagine that the US has the resources for 200 strawberries, which correlates to 2 computers, and also 100 strawberries in 1 computer. Let's also imagine that China has the resources to create 200 computers, which correlates to 100 computers in 1 strawberry, and also 2 strawberries. If China and the US cut each other off completely, and both countries want strawberries and computers, then the US will have 1 computer and 100 strawberries at best, and China will have 1 strawberry and 100 computers at best. Now let's say that both countries decide to open up to each other and allow free trade. China focuses on what it's best at, making computers, and the US focuses on its own specialty, growing strawberries. The US makes 200 strawberries, and China makes 200 computers. China and the US can exchange 100 computers and 100 strawberries. So now both countries have 100 computers and 100 strawberries, as opposed to what they previously had. Both countries benefit from free trade. Of course, you have to keep in mind that the computer manufacturers in America will go out of business, and the same goes for strawberry farmers in China. That being said, there are jobs created in the industry needed to import and export these goods. Also, these people can move to another industry that could use the manpower. Additionally, it's important to note that while manufacturing jobs have been lost due to outsourcing, more recently, most jobs have actually been lost due to automation. On top of that, free trade improves diplomatic relations and disincentivizes war. After all, why attack a country when it would put a serious dent in your economy? Another benefit is that the whole world can exchange the best aspects of their respective cultures. So for example, basketball, an American sport, made its way to China and Europe. On a more serious note, countries that may have had an anti-liberal culture or economic system may be influenced by the influx of American goods and services into the country. Many also feel that the poor are exploited, but the truth is that for many of these workers, these jobs are the only source of income, and if it weren't for these jobs, then the workers working in these sweatshops would most likely have starved to death. So just to let you know, I personally lean more towards the concept of free trade, but rather than just discussing concepts, let's discuss the real world, where this issue becomes far more complicated. A while back, Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont proposed a bill to import cheaper drugs from Canada, so long as they met some safety requirements. He received support from many Democrats and even some Republicans, but some politicians voted against this bill. Many, including myself, believe that this had something to do with the massive amount of campaign contributions made by pharmaceutical companies to said politicians. You may be thinking at this point that protectionism is just another tool for corrupt corporations and politicians to engage in crony capitalism. But once again, it's just not that simple. Let's discuss the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. 12 countries involved in the TPP include the US, Japan, Australia, Peru, Malaysia, Vietnam, New Zealand, Chile, Singapore, Canada, Mexico, and Brunei. Some of the major objections to the TPP include the following. It granted medical corporations exclusive rights to new drugs and medical procedures for up to 5 years after their invention. This, of course, means those companies will hold monopoly over the drug or procedure for this period of time. In America, this actually already exists. The companies that have a monopoly on essential medical drugs or procedures often price gouge, and this contributes to the high costs Americans pay for medical treatments. Many other countries don't have these problematic laws, but the TPP would change that. On top of this, the TPP grants companies the right to file indefinite patent extensions so the monopoly may last for more than 5 years. Point number 2 is that it makes it easier for countries that have signed the deal to avoid food safety standards. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has already prevented seafood imports from many of the TPP countries that contain salmonella, E. coli, and unsafe levels of mercury. The TPP could have led to an influx of these contaminated goods into the US. The last and perhaps the most shocking facet of this trade agreement that I will cover is that the TPP contains a special dispute resolution process that allows corporations to challenge the laws of countries that could hurt their future profits. For example, companies can legally challenge environmental regulations, and the lawsuit will be brought before an international tribunal that will override domestic courts. You know, really, the TPP contains many more of these undesirable features. Simply put, this trade agreement was crafted by large corporations for large corporations. Let's now discuss Trump's trade war with China. People would generally expect that capital would flow from the slow-growing developed economy to the faster-growing developing economy. This occurred in the early 1900s, when the United Kingdom had a current account surplus of 4% of their GDP. So this just means more goods and services were exported than imported. Their capital was flowing to Russian railroads, and so on. Back then, there was relatively free trade. Nowadays, China, a developing country, has capital flowing into the US. This is the main reason behind America's current account trade deficits. And that just means far more goods and services are being imported than exported. Right now, the US is importing around $450 billion a year from China and exporting around $100 billion a year. What could be the reason behind this? Why aren't Chinese consumers buying American products as much as American consumers are buying Chinese products? Does it involve China's violation of intellectual property laws? After all, if you're living in China, why go through the trouble of buying an American product if a Chinese company made the same exact copy of said product? Does it involve policies that promote American consumption but prevent investment in America? Here's a tweet by Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla Motors, on tariffs between the US and China. An American car going from China pays 25% import duty, but a Chinese car coming to the US only pays 2.5%, a tenfold difference. The obvious solution to that problem is that the US car companies should build factories in China, so that way they don't have to pay the tariff. But China does not allow US car companies to own 100% of the factory they build in China, so it's tough to bring cars into the country and tough to build cars within the country. So maybe the president is right about the fact that there may not be fair trade at the moment between the US and China. But can America withstand a trade war with China? Well, this is tough to predict. It seems like it should. Americans buy far more from China than China buys from America. In other words, Chinese businesses need American customers far more than American businesses need Chinese customers. One area of concern for the US includes agricultural goods like soybeans and wheat, and also companies that rely on Chinese steel. A similar situation applies to the US-Germany relationship. The US has a massive trade deficit with Germany. Well, that's all for now. If you like this video and can afford to do so, then please donate to my PayPal or Patreon so I can make more of them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.